Welcome back to the Anti-Meta Meta Club. This week's race C is a Group 3 race at Interlagos, and I don't think the meta or the anti-meta cars are going to be that surprising. Let's get into it. The anti-meta car of the week is once again the 458 Italia, 2 weeks in a row. Truth be told, many cars work for this combo, though it does seem to favor MR and RR cars. When it comes to MR cars, the 458 can stand with the best. I managed to get a 131.017, agonizingly close to getting under 131. Couldn't quite do it, but I was the fastest of the 458 Italias. With the exception of a couple outliers, the RR and MR cars dominate, especially the R8 and, of course, the 911. For the first time in a long time, a car seems to be able to stand up just as fast as the 911, and that is the R8. I'm not sure which one's actually faster, but the 911 does seem to be a little bit easier to drive. As soon as your lap starts, you're going to look for the number boards on the fence, you're going to look for the 50-meter board, and you're going to brake right before it, keeping yourself on this side of the white line. After the fence, you're going to see some grass, you're going to start turning in just before that, and you're going to want to trail brake in, heavily getting down to second gear before you approach the curb. Avoiding the high part of the curb, we're going to aim for just left of the center of the track, and you're going to see I'm actually just right in the center instead of to the left of it. That was a mistake that ended up costing me a lot. What you want to do either way is turn in first and then lift off the throttle just so you can barely stay on this curb right here, or at the very least stay just on the low end. If you hit the top like I did here, you might bounce and it might send you to a weird angle, so you can't hug this curb, which is exactly what it did. Since I came off the curb right here, I started understeering a little bit, but of course I didn't want to lift off the throttle. Either way, it slowed me down and I lost at least a half a tenth because of all that. If I stayed just a little tighter on the exit of the first left, I would have had a much better angle for the rest of this and gone a lot faster. When you start seeing the meter boards on the right, you're going to look for the 100 meter board, and after that, you're going to see this little paved part right here. Just before that, you're going to hit the brakes heavily. Wait until you're completely past the 50 meter board to start turning in, and you can actually stay in third. The car does seem to still respond well. As you can see, I'm apexing just before that paved part. If you apex any earlier than that, you're probably going to go off, or you're going to have to wait too long to get on the throttle. You want to be able to get on the throttle as soon as you hit the apex, but if you go past that curb, it's going to make you slide and cost you a lot of time. Align yourself on the left side of the track, look for the number boards, and about 10 meters before the 50 meter board, you're going to start braking gently, turning in, and you're going to downshift to fourth and then third just as you hit this first apex. It's important to note that you want to use a little bit less brake than you would for a normal corner of this shape because you are going uphill. And I want you to note that I'm also adding a lot of steering throughout the entirety of it. When I get on the throttle, I have to lift off a little bit to make sure I'm not understeering, but you want to stay on the throttle as early and as long as you possibly can. Going all the way up on the curb, right before this curved tire mark that you see right here is where I want you to hit the brakes. I want you to take a look at these tire marks, however. They're going to tell you exactly what angle to go in as you hit the brakes, and you're going to start turning in even more and trail braking as you get fully on the pavement. We're going to get all the way down to first gear, and you're going to notice that there are a lot of tire marks on the curb right about where we hit it. I want you to also notice right here that the left side of the car, the left tires are not on the curb. If you put all 4 tires on the curb, it's probably going to make you slide, and you do not want that right here. Shifting up to second before getting on the throttle, I also want you to note that I'm not actually facing the direction I want to go because this car continues to turn as you get on the throttle. Keeping our eyes on the next curb, you're going to see that I'm aiming the car just past it, so the front of my car is not pointing at it any longer. Right before the beginning, we're going to turn in first and then add a tiny amount of brake. Getting down to first gear as we come off the curb, trying to get the car to rotate and hit a second apex. If the car rotates and you can actually make it fully on the throttle without going into the grass, you can get on the throttle, but I should have waited to hit an actual second apex. I would have been quicker if I did. There's pretty much no choice but to be turning a little bit as we're about to get on the brakes right here. If you see the beginning of this green patch on the left, right when you pass that is where you're going to hit the brakes, and you're going to try to straighten out the steering wheel just a little bit. Braking heavily initially, but then trail braking immediately after that. I want you to take a look at these tire marks that are aiming towards this late apex. We essentially just want to follow those. I like to completely avoid the high part of this curve because it can unsettle the car. If you avoid that, then you can get heavily on the throttle in second gear. And like before, the car does continue to turn as you get on the throttle as long as you're really careful. Once your car's settled, you're going to start turning to the right and you're going to look for this dark patch where all the tire marks are. You want to get yourself onto that dark patch before then starting to turn in, staying full throttle at this point. Depending on your speed and approach, you're going to have to lift off a certain amount. What you want to do is get as close to that high part of the curb without actually going up onto the high part of the curb because that will make you spin in most cars, but once you touch the curb, you can generally get back on the throttle, and you're really just gonna have to use your instincts to determine if you have to come off. You do not want to have to come off, and you don't want to go all the way onto the curb there. The next braking zone is extremely tricky. It's essentially just past the halfway mark between the end of the curb here and the 50-meter board right there. There are some tire marks you can use, but at that point, you do want to hit the brakes as heavily as you can. I like to make sure that I get off the brakes as early as I possibly can, turning in at the end of the grass there. We want to hit this curb, but of course not too much, and then get fully on the throttle in second gear, trying to track out as far as we can, but we do want to keep our left tires off of that exit curb. From there, you want to just hug the inside. What you do after this depends on whether or not you think you're going to do another lap. If you do think you're going to do another lap, then you can start tracking out after the pit lane. But if you don't think so, then you want to hug the inside as much as you can because it is a shorter line and you can get a faster time. As I mentioned in the breakdown, I should have sacrificed this first left. You're going to see that I'm a little bit to the right of the center of the track right here. I should actually be a little bit to the left. It's because of that I hit the curb there and I hit that apex early, which put me onto the curb too high, which bounced me off the curb. If I'd done that correctly, I'd actually be able to ride that last left-hand curb, which would have made it so I can steer less and I can keep up more momentum and essentially just gone a lot faster through there. You can also stay in third gear for that. As long as you hit a late apex, you can get on the throttle really early. Just avoid going off and past that curb on the exit. A lot of people go too deep and or over brake in this corner. Since it's going uphill, you can actually get away with braking a lot less. You do want to gradually add steering the entire way all the way to the exit here. And if you brake while your tires are off the curb, you're probably going to get a penalty and you're definitely going to slide. Speaking of sliding, if you use too much of the curbs here, you'll definitely slide and you can definitely hit a second apex there and probably go a lot faster than I did. It's very easy to apex too early here and also use too much of that curb, both of which will make it so your setup for this part is extremely slow. You may end up having to lift off the throttle a lot more than you should, and you can actually lose a whole bunch of time in that section. A lot of people end up losing time, of course, going up this hill here, but I think the section before that, between the hairpin and the final corner, a lot of people end up losing a lot of time there. Like I said, if you want to do another lap, or if you think this lap wasn't good enough, then track out a little bit here to set yourself up for the next corner. But if not, stick to the left because it is a shorter line and you can squeeze a couple hundredths or thousandths out of your lap. This week's race features a pretty traditional strategy. Essentially, you've got a hard compound, a medium compound, and you've got to use both of them. I mention this every time, but I do think it's worth repeating because I don't think it makes a lot of sense to everyone. And of course, there might be some new people around, but because of the way that Gran Turismo's multipliers work, it makes a lot of sense no matter where you are to start on the hard tires. If you're in the very, very front, starting on the medium tires is safer in some circumstances because people who are starting right behind you, you can never really trust people that you don't know. And if you can just do whatever you can to get away from them and not have to worry about battling people, then you could use a medium compound first strategy. However, it is overall usually a slower potential race time strategy. At the beginning of the race, you're going to have a full tank of fuel, and by the time you go into the pits, whenever that is, you're going to have less fuel. So your second stint is going to be less damaging overall on the tires. So if you start on the softer compound, the mediums, then you're going to actually do more damage to them than you potentially could if you had started with the harder compound. Starting on the softer compound in the back, so starting on the mediums, is almost never advised because so many things can go wrong. And all the reasons that you don't want to start on the softs from the front are multiplied by the fact that you'll have a lot of traffic to contend with, traffic that is on a harder compound, and it's probably just going to ruin your tires. I actually had a pretty successful run starting with the complete wrong tire strategy, but a lot of factors went into that. I definitely do not suggest that. In a best case scenario where you don't actually have anyone else on the track, starting on hards and then pitting somewhere around lap 3 is most likely the fastest possible pit strategy. But of course, lots of different factors go into that. What's really interesting about the popular races is that more people end up doing their research when it comes to the popular races. And so more people end up doing the smarter strategy, which then makes the smarter strategy the crowded strategy. And when the pit lane is crowded and the track is crowded, it's actually not faster. What I mean is most people are going to know by the time that you do this race that starting on hards and then pitting somewhere around the third lap is most likely the fastest way to do this race. But since so many people are going to be doing that, a lot of people are going to be slowing each other down because they're going to be in such close proximity going into the pits at the same time. This race happened Monday afternoon, approximately when it is the most busy for the North and South Americas region. And when it's most busy then, that means that the people in the EMEA region have been doing this race for over 12 hours already. On one of the first races that I did, I noticed that a lot of people did seem to know the strategy, but a couple of the really fast drivers decided to completely circumvent that, do an overcut, work together, and they ended up in or on the podium starting from the back. The guy ahead, Velasa, was one of those guys, I believe, and I also knew that if he was going to do that, I could work with him. We work with each other all the time in these races, and then we, of course, try to pass each other towards the end. But I knew if I worked with him and used his slipstream, possibly bump drafted him, if I could actually catch back up to him, then we would definitely be able to pull off an overcut on all of the people who were trying to do the normal strategy. Unfortunately for me, I hadn't practiced much with this car, and even though they were still well within slipstream range, all of them ahead were in a big slipstream train, and if I didn't absolutely nail the next few corners, they were going to lose me since I had to work to pass the last guy that we passed. Fast forward almost a full lap ahead, and they had actually lost me and shaken me from the slipstream range. However, they all started to battle just a little bit thanks to a gentleman who happened to drive the old Supra. I have no clue how he was actually making it work as well as he was, but even though he was driving it really well, it's still too slow, and it looked like Dan was getting a little impatient and trying to make moves, which was very good for me. That car is hilarious. It definitely does not really work for this race, but he was making it work a little bit. So props to that guy, and also thanks to him, I was able to catch all the way up to Velasa and Dan, and I wasn't just lost. If I had to drive completely by myself, I probably would have benefited from going to the pits even earlier, but since I was able to catch them, then the initial plan was on. Well, I was hoping that Dan would actually go with us. He went in the pits, and instead, the Supra driver stayed out in front, which meant the Velasa and I were definitely going to have to pass him as fast as possible, or else our long overcut strategy was definitely not going to work. Jumping to the end of the lap, you can see that Velasa was able to get past him, but I unfortunately could not. I really lucked out here when he decided to go in the pits, and Velasa still was not a full second away, which meant that he was not going to be out of the slipstream zone, but he was really close to Art in the Lamborghini. Art is one of the fastest drivers in the region, and if he was able to get slip from him and I wasn't able to catch Velasa, then I was essentially going to be completely by myself, and I'd have no choice but to go in the pits and just try to catch up with all the people who had pulled off the undercut or the normal strategy. One lap later, and Velasa indeed did break the slip from me, and it looked like he definitely had the slip from Art in front of him. I did pull off the fastest hard lap that I'd done so far, and it did seem like I was finally starting to get used to the car, starting to figure it out. So I decided to just stick with it, not go in the pits, because if I did go in the pits and abandon the current strategy, I might have some luck against the other people who had pit early, but I also might end up behind the guy in the Supra, and I think that my race probably would have been over at that point. At the end of the next lap, I had essentially been able to maintain the same distance. Actually, I think I was slightly behind, but almost the same distance. And Velasa decided to go in the pits now, so of course I tried to follow him. I thought that chances are he was going to be able to pull away, but hopefully I'd been able to go fast enough on my first stint on the hard tires that an overcut could have worked, especially against the guy in the Supra. I'm not trying to pick on him, it's just that that car is really hilarious. And the chances of him actually being able to go so much faster, even on the medium compound, were really slim to none. If I'd spent enough time on my first stint that I could put some distance in front of him, that I thought that I might still actually have a chance at a good race. You can kind of see where the other drivers are. It's a little hard. If you look at the left, you can see it trying to update the positions, and you can see this big group of people that were passing us, the blue arrows that you can see on the map. And there are also a bunch of other cars that seem to be behind us. And I wasn't sure who was who, but as soon as we came completely out of the pits, I realized I was actually much closer to Velasa. And I think it's because, for whatever reason, I believe it's based on the gearing of the cars. Some cars just exit the pits faster, and because of that, I was able to stick with Velasa, and the race was back on. If you look at the top left, you can tell that we can't see everyone who's in front of us. We know that Windfire was starting on pole. He started on the opposite strategy as well, and Windfire is one of the best drivers we've ever had. There was no chance in us catching him whatsoever. I didn't know what strategy Shahir and Zwart had taken, so there was a chance that we might be able to catch up with them, and I pretty much didn't have a clue who was in between Art and them, who was in between 7th and 3rd place. but I guessed that Dan was, and I thought that maybe the super guy was, but probably not. I also couldn't see that far behind, and it would make more sense that the super guy was way behind us, but of course, we had yet to see. Jumping forward 3 laps, and Velasa was able to pass our friend Chappie going into T1, and it's at this point that I should mention that Velasa is in the other Porsche. If you're looking for another anti-meta car, as you can see, the original Porsche, the RSR, does work really well as well. Now, despite the fact that I got a better exit, Chappie had the slipstream from Velasa, so there was no way I was going to be able to get next to him before this, so I had to go for a bit of a lunge, but of course, Chappie's our friend. We're not going to go ahead and push him off track, and staying clean meant that Chappie was still able to get a better run going into this corner, and he had a much better position here. At this point, I was thinking I probably shouldn't battle him too much, but it looked like I had a bit of an opportunity as I slid in right here, and I think Chappie ended up just letting us go. Forgive me for speaking for you, Chappie, but I can only assume that he decided that it was probably going to cost too much time if we kept battling, and it didn't seem like I was going to give up, though I actually would have just pushed him if he had defended, not pushed him off, I mean, I would have just bump drafted him so we could stay with the group ahead until it seemed like maybe my pace was fast enough, but since he just gave it up right then, I then had to catch Velasa again, and he didn't have to worry about anyone from behind catching up and passing both of us. It's situations like this where you have to really consider the cost of battling. You may want to defend your position, but if you defend too much, you both may end up losing multiple positions. I've been in that situation too, where a faster driver or a driver who had better tires was attacking from the rear, and it just didn't make sense to defend too much, but of course, you don't just want to give it up. So all these decisions have to be made on the fly, and it can be difficult to decide what to do, but I do think that if I were in Chappie's position, I would have done the same thing. You may remember back on lap 3, our friend Dan went into the pits, and I think it's because so many people ended up going to the pits early, he probably had to battle a lot of people, and even though he was all the way up in 6th place after starting in the back, his tires had suffered from all of that battling, and so we were able to catch him with our super long overcut strategy. Giving him the bump can satisfy a few different things that I wanted to do. Firstly, I wanted to stay closer to Shahir and Velasa so I could potentially try to pass Shahir and eventually Velasa as well. It also serves to help Dan out so Dan is not a victim of anyone behind us, but also it just makes a lot more sense because if I just try to pass him, there's a good chance that he'd be able to use the slipstream of the people in front and potentially defend, and then we might both end up losing positions, or it might just cost too much time and we might end up just being in a battle with each other for the rest of the race. I think partially because I decided to bump him first and then go for the pass, and we were all still together, and so we could still work together, or at the very least save him from having to lose any more positions. And speaking of taking the right opportunity to pass, there was absolutely no use in me trying to pass Shahir anytime in the center of the track, anytime in the midfield. Because if I did try to pass him and I made some kind of mistake, or if I just failed, then Dan could then pick my pocket and end up in front of me, or it could make it so Velasa could just completely get away. If I do my best to just not bother Shahir, Shahir could potentially just stick with Velasa, and then I could try to do something similar to what I did with Dan leading into turn 1, and then hopefully still be able to stick with Velasa. Instead of trying to bump him since Velasa was so close, Velasa and I, like I said before, tend to team up a lot to try to get through traffic, and then we battle each other at the end. So I was pretty confident that Velasa would give me the slipstream, and he did. Thank you again, Velasa. That worked perfectly. With Velasa 7/10 ahead, and with his pace being pretty consistent and me having to try to pass Shahir going into turn 1, it seemed like Velasa was probably going to be pretty safe. There wasn't going to be a lot of chances for me to pull off a move, especially since I'm still a full 6/10 back. And I believe Velasa was probably very confident in his pace, as he should be, because he always has really good pace. We both had similar tires, but he had definitely been going faster throughout the race, and I was still going to have to defend against Shahir and Dan, so really, the race was pretty much over at this point. Jumping to the very end, as I had just predicted, Velasa was definitely safe. I was able to put almost a second between myself and Shahir, and Dan was sticking with him, so all in all of our friends ended up having a really good race. Windfire won, as we knew he would. Art, who also started in the back in the Lambo, and Velasa, who was in the RSR, all of us ended up in anti-meta cars, and if you don't count the R8, which I think we should, then there is no meta car. But really, even if the R8 is the meta car, at least it's not the Porsche right now. We love the Porsche, At least I think most of us do. I love the Porsche. It's just so unfortunate. It's so incredibly overpowered right now that you pretty much always expect at the top. So it was really nice to see that it was completely locked out of the top 4. Great racing, everybody. Thank you for watching my video. I'm going to leave you with a look at my current members. I love every one of you. Thank you very much.